The fighting in the Kursk Oblast, or political region of Ukraine, is still ongoing, and it would be much too soon to derive any lessons to be learned from this event. What I can do is pick up from the previous episode, examining how this campaign might offer examples of the lessons from previous podcasts in the ancient art of modern warfare. Welcome to the Ancient Art of Modern Warfare. I'm Chris Mayer, retired U.S. cavalry officer and at one time instructor for the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College and the Naval War College. These podcasts are my attempt to explain enduring principles of war that I think all citizens should understand in their participation in a representative democracy. If you think these episodes are worthwhile, please hit like, follow, or subscribe, and share these with friends and colleagues. Let's begin with the overall strategic setting. Russia continues its World War I-style tactics in the eastern part of Ukraine. This is a war of attrition, spending manpower and resources Putin believes he can afford to expend in the effort to bleed Ukraine of manpower and resources it cannot replace or afford to lose. Russia has made some gains all along that front, similar to gains made by either side in World War I trench warfare. As I prepare this, Ukraine's attack in the north has, in a few short weeks, captured more Russian territory than Russia has taken from Ukraine in the past year. Ukraine continues to probe, looking for weak spots to exploit with long-range reconnaissance and force operations. Russia has not been able to reduce Ukraine's gains, but it has been able to limit the immediate threats to the city and the nuclear power plant of Kursk. In the south, not much has changed. All in all, and despite Russian propaganda directed to the West and its own people, this situation is embarrassing to Russia. The war is no longer a foreign intervention, but Russian civilians are now feeling the immediate effects of the war. In response to this embarrassment, Russia launched deep strikes throughout Ukraine targeting energy infrastructure. Ukraine has returned the favor, within the limits of restrictions placed on it by the West in using armaments provided by the West. More recently, Ukraine has been able to use Ukrainian-produced deep strike weapons. These are limited in number, but not subject to Western restrictions. Now, an interesting point about the energy infrastructure attacks. While the European Union countries supply arms and money to Ukraine and sanction Russian entities, those same EU countries continue to import gas from Russia, making up about 15% of the EU's gas imports. This includes delivery by pipelines that go through Ukraine. Ukraine allows this and is being paid by Russia for this transit. Kiev says it will end its agreements with Russia's Gazprom, but only at the conclusion of the current agreement at the end of this year. As you might imagine, it's not in Russia's or Ukraine's interest to attack these pipelines or related facilities. Now, if you read that in a fictional war story, you'd likely put the book down saying, "This was ridiculous. Who could believe it?" But it's true. Back to the major principles of war. As described in previous episodes, war is an act of violence intended to compel the enemy to do your will. For that, we need to know what a nation intends to achieve by the war. Begin with the end in mind. Russia's intended end state has wavered somewhat, going anywhere from a complete incorporation of Ukraine into a new Russian empire to Putin's current objectives of demilitarization, neutrality, and surrender of territory Russia currently occupies and territory it does not yet occupy. Ukraine wants Russia out of all the territory that Russia recognized as Ukraine in 1994 when Kiev agreed to surrender its nuclear weapons. Will the Kursk offensive cause Russia to change its objectives or enable Ukraine to achieve its objectives? Since the previous episode, Zelensky has confirmed what I speculated then. Russian territory captured by Ukraine may be used to trade for Ukrainian territory occupied by Russia. As I said in the last episode, this idea is entirely consistent with Clausewitz and, in fact, most wars up to the 20th century. Another development is that the success in Kursk is providing the opportunity for Zelensky to meet in the U.S. with current and potential future presidents to present Ukraine's plan for victory. This is, in a way, similar to Lincoln waiting for a victory of sorts so that the Emancipation Proclamation did not seem like an act of desperation. Now, please don't think I'm in any way comparing Zelensky to Lincoln. I'm just remarking on a similar situation. Next, if the enemy is to be coerced to do your will, you must put him in a position even more unpleasant than the sacrifice you call on him to make. So far, the Kursk offensive does not seem to be doing that. So far. Although this Ukrainian offensive does not immediately change the balance in that war, it does seem to concern Moscow enough that it is threatening to change its policy on the use of nuclear weapons. This leads to another warfighting principle. War is a human endeavor. In many ways, this conflict is focused on one man and his perceptions. What is it that will get Vladimir Putin to end the war? How will the Ukrainian offensive, or whatever strategy Zelensky will bring to Washington, do that? Tied to this is Clausewitz's most famous statement, that war is a continuation of policy with the addition of other means. The other elements of national power, diplomacy, economic activity, including trade, the use of information, all continue. We see this even between Ukraine and Russia through prisoner exchanges and Russian petro-energy shipments to the European Union and through Ukraine. Since neither Russia or Ukraine are likely to be defeated in the way Germany and Japan were in World War II, there will be a diplomatic end to this war. I believe that when Russia and Ukraine finally begin serious peace negotiations, it will use third parties. This could be the International Committee of the Red Cross, the United Nations, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, or maybe even the United States representing Ukraine and China representing Russian interests. Next, in war, only offensive operations are decisive. Defense only buys time to wear down the enemy or time to husband your own resources until you can take the offensive. In this way, the Kursk operation could be decisive, but only if Ukraine can maintain the offensive there or use that success to launch offensives elsewhere. In Kursk, Ukraine maintains the offensive through maneuver warfare tactics rather than the attrition tactics in the east. As I said in the last episode, these are not the grand-scale sweeps of World War II. In Kursk, maneuver is more at the tactical level, with the Ukrainian armed forces using interior lines to probe Russian positions, abandoning efforts where Russia is strong and hitting where there is weakness. It could be, and I'm speculating here, that such probes intend to draw Russian forces away from other sectors, weakening those sectors so that Ukraine can attack there, looking to encircle, isolate, and encourage cut-off forces to surrender before being defeated in detail. How long Ukraine can keep that up is the question. In the meantime, Kiev maintains a degree of initiative. On the other hand, as long as Russia enjoys sanctuary areas where Ukraine is prohibited from attacking because of restrictions placed on it by the West, Russia will maintain the opportunity to rest, refit, relocate, and recover and keep pressure on Kiev in the east. Shortly after the war started in Ukraine, the BBC and Australian Broadcasting interviewed me about the likely course of the war. I said that I thought it would become a frozen conflict, which it did, at least up until a couple of weeks ago, and that the West would provide only enough armaments to Ukraine to enable them to die gallantly. Although that seemed true early in the war, the West is now providing Ukraine with the arms it needs. On the other hand, restrictions in using these weapons limits Ukraine's ability to take the offensive to Russia. In other words, it hobbles the ability of the Ukrainian armed forces to cause Russia the pain necessary to bring about a just and lasting peace. In the meantime, time may not be on Ukraine's side. The limitations the West places on Ukraine, apparently to not overly upset Russia, limits Ukraine's ability to wage a successful war. This means the war drags on, attriting the West's willingness to continue supporting Ukraine. Many in the West refuse to see that Ukraine's defeat will encourage Russian aggression, ultimately leading to the conflict that placating Putin attempts to preclude. Curiously, a little more than 5 decades ago, Russia was completely unconcerned that the level of support Moscow provided Hanoi in the Vietnam War would unnecessarily provoke the United States against Russia. Why is that different now?